Hello and welcome to the latest Oxplore live event. Today we will be discussing the big question, should under 18s be allowed to vote? Now, as usual in these sessions, there will be lots of opportunities for live interaction. There will be polls, there will be opportunities for you to write comments and questions in the chat, which I can then put to our panel, who I will introduce in just a moment. And as with all of these events, this whole thing will be recorded and then we'll go onto YouTube afterwards so you can rewatch and revisit some of the hopefully very interesting discussion that we are going to have today. I just realized I didn't introduce myself. So I am Tom Crawford. I am a mathematician here at Oxford University and I've been doing these events for a good while now and they are always fun. So I'm very excited to be back and thank you all of you for joining. If you are new, welcome. This will be fun. And if you're returning, it's great to see you again. The other admin stuff, if you do want to use the chat or vote in the polls, which we very much want you to do so, then you will need to enter a name into the box and click join. You can also add your school if you want to, and I would recommend adding your school because there will actually be a competition for the most thought-provoking question that is sent in from any of you as the viewers. We will select that later this week and then send you a prize. So in order to be eligible for the prize, we need to know who the person is and where they are based so we can send you your prize. So put your name and school if you want to be eligible for that. Otherwise, I think we can meet our panel. So first we will go to Matt, if you would like to introduce yourself.
Hello, yes, I'm Matt Williams. I'm a tutor in politics here at Oxford University and I'm also what's known as an Access Fellow, which means I'm responsible for opening up the University of Oxford and similar universities to people who historically have been rather underrepresented here.
Brilliant. So anything related to politics, I guess, is coming your way.
Yes.
Which is probably all of the questions. But I say this because politics specific will be Matt, but then we also have Mary, who is a specialist in law, I believe.
Hi everyone, my name is Mary Adeyemo. I am a postgraduate law research student at the University of Oxford. I'm also a lawyer, that is a barrister and a solicitor in Nigeria with over 3 years of legal experience before commencing my studies at the University of Oxford. And I've also had the privilege of working with both private and public organizations, for example, the World Bank, a tier 1 law firm in Nigeria, and I'm currently volunteering with the United Nations Women UK in commemoration of the International Women's Day. Thank you.
Awesome. Very, very cool. Okay, so as I said, expert panel as always to put your questions to. So I think we'll actually just kick off straight away with the question itself. Let's get your opinion on the big question up for debate. So let's kick off our first poll, which is, again, the big question, should under 18s be allowed to vote? So hopefully that is now appearing as live on your screens and you can cast your vote about voting and then we will discuss the results with the panel. And whilst you are casting your vote, what do we think as a panel? And I'm going to put it, I will give my opinion, but I'm going to give it to both of you first as the experts. I'm just the mathematician. So Matt, do you think under 18s should be allowed to vote?
100%. I think over the age of 16 you should be able to vote.
Okay, we've got a strong yes.
I disagree that under 18s should be allowed to vote. And I will say that in my presentation, of course, but I totally disagree with under 18s being, allowed to vote in the election.
Okay, so we have a definite difference of opinion here, which is interesting because I think I'm kind of on the fence. So I'm actually genuinely unsure. I think there are elements of it that suggests, I think, yes, under 18 should be allowed to vote, but then I also can totally see the opposite argument. So I'm actually genuinely going to be persuaded, I think, by what happens here. Maybe we'll see if I've changed my mind by the end and which side I settle on. Oh, interesting. I'm just getting the results through now. So I can see that we have, from all of you voting at home and at school, we have yes, 57%, and no, 42%. point something, maybe 43% to make it add to it. That's why the mathematician's here. So that's really close. That has surprised me, actually. I don't know if that's... It's interesting because you had a split of opinion, and it feels like we've got a pretty much a split of opinion here. So this I knew this was going to be good. Okay, so now we've mentioned the question, you've given your opinion. It's now the opportunity to actually hear from our panel, from our experts. So each of them has a short presentation they're going to give, or a short pitch as to back up the opinion they have just expressed. And then as you're watching the presentations, then please do put any questions in the chat. They will come through to me and I will feed those to our panel. But Matt, I think you're going to go first.
Great, yes, please. So hopefully you should be able to see a nice map of the world on your screens. And this shows the voting ages in different parts of the planet. And green describes any country that has voting for anyone over the age of 18. Red is anyone over the age of 16. Yellow, which I think is only Greece, but maybe a few other places, is anyone over the age of 17. And there's a few places that are blue, which is over the age of 20. So there are a few different approaches, but as you can see, the vast majority of the world figures that once you're 18, then you have the capacity to vote. And so that is usually associated with reaching adulthood. So when you're 18, you can also sign contracts without your parents' consent. You can get married. So it used to be that you could get married at 16 in this country with parental consent, but that's no longer true. Now you have to wait till 18. So there are various things that we basically say, you've got to wait till you're 18. And the underlying assumption is that when you're 18, you're an adult. So you have proper agency. But that's not true. That's legally true, but it is not biologically true. Biologically, our brains continue to develop until we're 25. I don't think anyone's seriously saying we stop people voting until they're 25 when they've developed a greater capacity to control their impulses, which is supposedly what happens when you're 25, although I'm not sure. It's basically completely arbitrary. It's just a random line in the sand. Someone who's spun around the sun 17 years and 364 days, and magically one night they suddenly become enlightened and capable of voting. No. And even with adults, we wouldn't take away their vote if we thought they weren't intelligent enough, if we thought that they weren't going to take it seriously enough. So we just draw a line in the sand. It's totally arbitrary, and I figure it might as well go younger. You could argue, well, then why not make 2-year-olds vote or go somewhere completely silly? But, I think 16 is sensible. And the reason being is because I want to have a wider, what we call in politics, selectorate. If you have a bigger group of people, you tend to make better decisions. So in my research, I look at legal language, how politicians write laws. And if there's a fairly narrow group of people writing those laws, we tend to get worse laws. In one example, a homelessness law that was designed to help homeless people actually led to more people becoming homeless because it was so poorly written. If we take a bit more time and a bit more effort to write those laws, we get better laws. So I want more people involved. And the other thing is that, and this is very personal, I trust 16-year-olds. I've had the great privilege of working with tens of thousands of young people in my Access work, and they fill me with nothing but hope. They're really motivated to talk about the future of the planet, the future of their housing crisis, the future of all sorts of important matters, and I want to bring them into that conversation. But I do have a bit of a sting in the tail, I'm afraid, which is on the next map. You can see countries where voting is compulsory. And I would say that voting should be closer to a duty than a right. And that is the case, as you can see, in much of South America and Australia and Belgium. And I would have that the case in this country. And we're going to discuss this a bit later, but it's quite common for young people not to turn out to vote. And I think they should. They can still record that they don't like any of the candidates, but I think they should still take part. So I would make it a duty. But there's my overall pitch, and I'd love to hear what people think.
I'm going to jump in immediately on that last point.
Yeah.
So if you're saying that it's compulsory, but they are able to say, I don't want to vote for any of the candidates.
Yes.
How is that necessarily different from just not voting in the first place?
Because it's just a higher level of engagement. You have to turn out to say, I don't want to engage. Right? You have to still make the effort. I mean, I think we could still make it easier for people. They could do it perhaps on their phones or on the internet. But I still feel like people should be encouraged very strongly. In other words, they could be fined if they don't engage to get involved. Because we need participation, I would say.
Okay, so it's not necessarily that, because I suppose that action of turning up but not actually voting by saying I don't want to vote for anybody, it obviously won't affect the results or the outcome.
No.
But it's forcing that engagement. It's forcing people to at least think about it and be aware of it.
Precisely.
Okay, interesting. I don't know, did you have anything to follow up with, Mary, or do you want to dive into your pitch?
I think he's done a good job to give us like the overview of what is obtainable in different parts of the world, and he's also done a good job by pointing out some of the shortcomings to say, despite some young people or younger people being allowed to vote in certain jurisdictions, we still see that these guys don't turn up. So making it a duty rather than a right, then that becomes a constitutional issue, because what we want them to do is to exercise the freedom of choice rather than an obligation to be forced to do something they really do not want to do. That's my opinion there.
Brilliant. And shall we just move straight on to your
Yeah.
pitch, I think, and then we will take questions.
Sure. While I agree that many under 18s are very intelligent and are doing so many commendable and laudable things in the community, I am of the opinion that under 18s should not be allowed to vote. First, on the position of equality and justice. Now, 18 years old in many parts of the world, as pointed out from the map, is a sign of adulthood, is a presumption of adulthood. It's not a conclusion of adulthood. And to be able to juxtapose between the rights and obligation and people having the freedom to do what they want to do and the choice they can freely exercise is why most countries have adopted the age of 18. And so I think that the age of 18 is the age that certifies a class or a group of people knowing what they want to do. Another point is manipulation or population manipulation. So many politicians really advocating that under 18 should be allowed to vote because of the population it will amass to them in terms of the choice to vote, not necessarily because they are interested in that class voting. So you find out that older generations, people generally who are above the age of 18 are having political apathy in terms of political participation, and it sort of technically affects the politician in quote who is contesting for a particular office or for a particular role. And so advocating for people less than 18 years old to vote is not because they're really interested in the choice of those people. It's just an advantage for them to manipulate that population for their own selfish reasons. Another thing we need to know is that for every right there's a corresponding obligation. For every right there's a corresponding duty. If under 18s are allowed to vote, it then also reduces your legal capacity in terms of crimes, for example, in ability to commit crimes, what the law will view to be able to say you have intent that is mensurate to be able to commit a crime. So if under 18s are allowed to vote, under 18s then means that we may have to scrap juvenile court, in the near future. We may have to start holding young people who are really exhibiting childhood tantrums, for example, the privilege to be able to be rehabilitated, because that's what juvenile court mostly guarantees us. So it takes away the childhood of young people rather than allowing them to express freely their childhood because of this age barrier. And doesn't mean that, again, that the fact that you're 18 you're automatically a responsible adult. It's a presumption of adulthood, and that's why before you attain the age of 18, my advocation or my advocacy is that we groom people to begin to participate in community work, whether taking responsibilities or roles as prefects or doing things in the community or in schools or working as volunteers for access programs and all of this. These are the things that will make people or younger people interested in politics. We can't just strip them of their childhood. We can't strip them of their choice. We can't strip them of their ability to grow fully into the presumption of adulthood without considering many other many other reasons, right? And not just looking at it from the point of the politicians or from the point of the government. We have to look at it from the point of those individuals. And if we feel that more people or older people who are above 18 are not making the right choice in terms of the politics, then that's a question for us to answer in another forum. But I must say that if we trust children with their parents, if we trust children with their grandparents, why can we not trust the judgment of those parents and grandparents in the political choice they make for this generation? I will also conclude with this point to say that The generation that we are today, they're very responsive, they're very intelligent, they're very, technologically savvy. But notwithstanding, we should also understand that the smartness or the intelligence is not across board. It's not everywhere in the world. It's not amongst every class. And to ensure that we put people or the blankets, everybody should be under the same condition. Everybody should understand that no one is better than me. No one is more intelligent than me. We should allow these children to grow into adulthood. The fact that a Nobel laureate or a child has attained a university degree laudably at the age of 14 doesn't make them an adult. That you are a child and doing adult stuff, or you are making adult steps or taking adult steps, doesn't make you an adult. And all of this is to say that under 18s should not be allowed to vote. They should wait till they're 18, because life is about processes. If you jump the process, you may actually be jumping life and it may lead to your death. Thank you very much.
Okay. A lot to process. Really interesting. Thank you, Mary. Something that I think both of you kind of picked up on, which I think might be like a nice first discussion point, was this kind of idea of how there are other elements of society that have age restrictions. So you were saying about certain, 16 is what it actually should be, and there are some things you can do at 16 that you can't do at 18, and some things you can do at 16 that you can't do at 15, and other things. And and I think from your perspective, Mary, you mentioned the legal aspect of you're tried as an adult once you're over 18, but you're a juvenile if you're younger than 18.
Yes.
So I just kind of wanted to get a bit of perspective, I suppose, on both of you as to maybe some examples of some of the things that are at these different ages, and maybe how they relate to and fit in with voting. I just think that's generally quite an interesting sort of theme that both of you touched on in one way or another.
Well, bluntly, it's a hot mess, right? We allow people to do different things at different ages, right? Yeah. We say that 16-year-olds are allowed to have sexual relations, but they can't watch pornography until they're 18. That 17-year-olds can drive, 18-year-olds can drink. You mentioned the juvenile court's exactly right, up until 18. Yeah. So it's all, as I said earlier, it's all just about how many rotations around the sun you've had. It doesn't make any sense. And so you might as well just draw another line in the sand if the goal is to increase participation, which is my goal. And hence I would just say 16. So that's my view on that.
I mean, whilst I agree that there are certain age restrictions for certain things, the goal really is not just about increasing participation, and the fact that we, allow under 18s to vote doesn't mean that they will actually fully participate. Like you earlier mentioned, if you're not interested in the crop of leaders who are participating in that election, it automatically disenfranchises them if they're not interested. So the essence of age restriction is for uniformity, really, because we want to ensure equity and justice. What is applicable to A should be applicable to B. It doesn't matter if A is more intelligent than B or if B is less intelligent than A. And that's the essence of the law. Because again, amongst a group or a class of people, we begin to find distinctions. You begin to find that some people are more responsive than the other. Some people are taller than others. Some people are shorter than others. It should not be a defining factor. And so that's why the law wants to be blind to who you are, how you sound, how you speak, to just say this blanket of people, we presume their responsibility, and that's why we say at the age of 18 we think you should be allowed to vote. And it doesn't mean that those who have attained the age of 18 really do vote. It's just a presumption of responsibility and a presumption of choice. I think that's why the law is, so everyone can be within the same regulatory brackets.
So would I be right then if I'm interpreting what you're saying as sort of say that all of these things maybe everything should just be 18 rather than having different, because you're saying that it's a hot mess. There are 16, 18, 21, etc. in different countries. So would it be easier from a perspective as a lawyer? Would it be better if it was just one line for everything?
I mean, it can be one line for everything. Because again, our social responsiveness is very different. And so that's why the law intentionally is sort of breeding people's responsibility through the process. So they get to a place where we do not need to monitor them. And for example, using our topic, we expect that people who have attained the age of 18 should probably be in university or be able to control their lives without any sort of monitoring. And if you can lead your own life yourself, if you can be responsible for your own life, then you can be responsible to contribute, to the determination of who leads the community. But if your parents are still telling you, oh, sit there, stand up, we can't trust your decision. You can be easily manipulated. A politician can come to your school to say, well, we'll be offering free chocolates to you every week. Chocolate is what matters to you. For your parent, it may be tax reduction, it may be, housing. So the political class will look at, well, under-16s are going to be very good for us, maybe because they can be easily manipulated. Doesn't mean that older people cannot be easily manipulated, but generally the population, the interest of the population, I'm sorry, I have some biases against Gen Zs, but you find most people on TikTok, Instagram, when other people are concentrating, on trying to make ends meet, pay for bills. But younger people, well, whether they contribute or not, the family will generally, support them. So that's my thought.
Okay, we have a question from Lewiston School. Hello, Lewiston School. Thank you. They've sent a couple in, actually. So I think this one's definitely aimed at you, Matt.
Okay.
And you kind of touched on this a little bit. So Lewiston School have asked, if you force people to vote, are you taking away their free will or this idea of democracy?
100%. Of course you are. Yeah.
Does that not then contradict?
No. Well, so we talk about liberal democracy, right? So that you have certain rights, but as Mary said, rights come with obligations as well. They're always double-sided. And I think we just need to make that much more explicit. I think there can be a temptation to think in an entitled way, I'm entitled to citizenship. But actually, we should work to that. We should be putting shoulders to the wheel because we've got some serious problems confronting us and we all need to get a bit more involved in that. If some people just sit back and let the world pass them by, then they're not helping. And so, yeah, it is infringing people's free will, but I'm afraid those balances and those contradictions occur all over the place, and I'm quite comfortable with that.
Okay, and then did you have any thoughts?
Yeah, for me, taking away the freedom or the will sort of messes up the entire situation, in my opinion. Rather, it would be that what can we do to actually excite the voting class? Not just for, even right now, people who are above 18 or 18, many people still have political apathy. So it's not really changing the voting class. It's actually changing the voting environment. Are we stimulating people? Are we engaging them in things that will motivate them to want to vote? Are they excited about voting, or they see it as a burden rather than a choice that they should freely and interestingly exercise? But now many people see it as a burden, so they don't want to think about it. They're already dealing with life, and that's the last thing on their mind.
Yeah, we are going to touch on this idea of apathy. You call it voter apathy later on. So we will come back to that. That was a very good point you've raised there. Okay, so something else sort of that's been mentioned by a few of the questions coming in is, I guess, the practical aspect of voting at 16. So someone, Lewiston School again actually have said, should you be allowed to vote at 16 with your parents' permission? Or would there be, I think this is kind of ties into what you were talking about, Mary, could there be some kind of test or verification of somebody's ability to be able to make this level of decision that isn't just an arbitrary orbits of the sun? So I guess...
Well, I would very strongly say you should absolutely not require anyone's permission to vote as you like. That when 100 and so years ago there were discussions around giving votes to women, one of the arguments against giving women votes was because, well, they'll just ask their husbands and brothers who they should vote for. They'll seek permission, and therefore they don't have sufficient agency to figure it out for themselves. And although I'm in a slightly ironic position of saying you have to vote, I still think that the content of that vote should be up to the individual. And I think Mary mentioned that, there are many people over 18 who I wouldn't necessarily trust with that sort of responsibility. So, I don't think that age is a particularly good guide for whether or not you can trust someone's capacity in that regard. But that's why I think we need to get more people involved, and we need to educate them and make them realize how serious this is, that they ought to be able to make these decisions at a relatively young age.
And another one that's coming from Jacob and Gabrielle at Royal Belfast Academy. Hello, Jacob and Gabrielle. So they have said, if there is compulsory voting, what would the sanction be for not voting?
It's a fine in Australia and Belgium, and that seems about right. But they make it super easy to vote, so I think that's another side of the coin.
So I did want to touch on that because you mentioned this idea of like voting on your phone, or like. So do you think those things would be required for that kind of compulsory nature to actually work?
You'd obviously have to ensure security, right? Because the easier you make it to vote, the easier it can be for people to fiddle the votes. But still, I think making it easier than it is now, where nowadays you have to have photo ID and you have to go to a polling station. There's, frankly, I think those encumbrances have been put in to encourage people not to vote, and I don't like that.
Okay. Did you have anything to add to?
I think he's covered it, yeah.
Okay, awesome. I think, you know what, given we keep touching on this idea of how do we engage voters more, I think it would be a good time to do our second poll, actually, of the event. And then, because I think that's, I can't pretend that we haven't brought this issue up now. So, so we want your opinion on this. So there is a second poll, which will hopefully very shortly appear on your screen. And we would sort of want you to address this additional question of why do you think young people don't vote? So we have tried to put together a few ideas in those options. So you've got option A of they might think it doesn't make a difference, or you might think it won't make a difference. No interest in politics. Maybe it isn't accessible, just like Matt was mentioning. It can be quite difficult to actually get to a polling station with all of the 5 different types of ID you might require. And also there's an other option. And of course, if you do vote for other, which you are very welcome to do, then please let us know in the chat what that other reason might be. And then we can sort of use those for discussion points ourselves. So whilst you're all voting, what do we think over here then? So I guess let's start with rather than saying, we'll flip it in a moment, but let's start with why do you think people don't vote, and young people in particular? And then we'll come to what can we do to change that?
Yeah. I think because they don't find the political scenario interesting enough, right? It's not a Beyonce concert or a Rihanna concert, or, you know, it's not something they find interesting. And as you've rightly pointed, they don't see it as making any difference. They just say, oh, I'm just a young person, 1 out of a million, you know, 1 million or 2 million voters. It wouldn't change anything. But people and young people, even adults, forget that drops of water makes the mighty ocean. And so people don't find it interesting. And also the political scene, like you said, discourages voters. So you have to leave your house, you have to go to the polling booth, you have to do verification. It's more difficult than doing laundry, you know. So that really discourages a lot of people from voting. Yeah.
And Matt, what do you think?
Well, there's a bit of a negative cycle, right? And I can totally agree with Mary that you have governments that get elected by a group of voters, and then those governments will pander to those group of voters, and it just sort of feeds back and back and back that people don't feel engaged with politics because they don't feel politics speaks to them, and then there's no incentive for the politicians to speak to them, and it just gets worse and worse, which is why partly I'm suggesting we hijack the whole thing and we force people to vote, but in order to try and break that cycle. But also government politicians, those in power, have an incentive to have a smaller and smaller group of people they have to talk to, because it makes their job easier. They don't have to sort of come up with complicated consensuses. And it's opposition politicians, as Mary said earlier, who are encouraged to try and make it wider and wider because they could get more votes. So as you pointed out, it's only in countries where they thought they would get more votes that they've introduced votes for 16-year-olds, which is utterly undeniable. I can't say anything against that. So you get this sort of toing and froing, but ultimately I think there's this negative cycle that we need to break.
So the results that I have in front of me, it has now closed. Okay, so the final results are that 9% of people said it won't make a difference, but overwhelming majority, 63%, said there was no interest in politics.
Okay.
And then there were a few others that were pointed out. And this is a really nice comment that I will pass to both of you, which has come from Cody at Lord Grey Academy. Hello, Cody. Says, I am part of Milton Keynes Youth Council, and we have found out that young people are simply not bothered or interested in voting currently at their age. What do you think? You're always advocating for sort of young, you know, and Cody here is saying that he's just young people just don't care. They're
Well,
just not interested.
I think they maybe don't care in the nitty-gritty political process, but they absolutely care in the consequences, right? They care about climate change, they care about housing prices, they care about pension rates, they care about taxation, they care about policing, right? So they obviously care with the outputs, but just not the inputs. And that's why I think we need to get them more interested in the inputs so they understand how much more they could do about it.
Yeah, I mean, I'll start by saying that you can do the same thing over and over again and expect to get a different result. Now, so young people are not interested because, again, of their environment. What are their, guardians saying? What are their parents saying? What are their teachers saying? What are their tutors saying? What is their community response, right? So these are the things that we inform people's choices, whether they will be politically interested or they'll be politically disinterested. And so again, it's a burden for the political class to see that they are the future of the community. And if these guys don't get involved, this community will collapse one day. And we don't want it to collapse. We don't want to go from 1,000, progresses to 1 billion minus 1 billion backwards. So we need to begin to, an overhauling of the entire system to say we need to start doing things differently. What are the things we can do? Do we not force, or do we mandate, children to do volunteering before they graduate from high school or during their basic studies or GCSE, whatever thing? So these are the things to inform them. And so where I come from, in my part of the world, there's something we do, a day governor, or so we could have a day prime minister in the UK, where that young person who should definitely be, not up to 18 or maybe 16 or 15, who has done something great, and any decision they make that day becomes binding. And so because many people, when there is competition in something, you find more people interested, and the incentive will also encourage young people to participate. But if I'm not going to get anything out of it anyway, and whatever I do doesn't make sense to the political class, why do I need to waste my time when I can be playing, a game or go for a concert and have fun? Yeah. So we should make it more interesting.
And so another comment that's just come up here, just thought I would mention, which again I think was sort of addresses what both of you have said. Like someone said, I believe politics comes off very negative nowadays on the news and TV. So it's like you're seeing all this negative stuff, so you're like, I'm just going to ignore that, and like you say, go to a concert instead. Okay. Now a couple of other questions that draw my attention. So this one has come from Christ's College Brecon. Hello, Christ College Brecon. Would lowering the voting age to 16 force political parties to address issues that impact young people, which seem to be ignored currently?
Yeah, definitely. So Brecon is in Wales, where 16-year-olds are allowed to vote for the Senedd, but not for United Kingdom general elections. And we have you heard of a sort of population pyramid, where we look at how the population growth rates are happening? And ours is becoming a bit sort of top-heavy because we have a lot more old people than young people. And that's feeding exactly the cycles that we were talking about, where policies tilt towards those older people, partly because they're more likely to vote, but partly because there's just more of them. And I think we need a bit more balance on the seesaw, personally.
And I guess just sort of off the back of that then, would there be, would some kind of like proportional representation of the votes of young people, do you think that could be like another helpful way of maybe engaging them or seeing more of that impact?
I would have thought so. I mean, that's a whole other conversation, but I think so, yes, because the current system we have wastes a lot of votes. We have first past the post, and there are lots of people who will go out to vote and their vote won't be counted. And in proportional representation, your vote is much more likely to be counted. There are some downsides to proportional representation, but I think, yeah, in terms of people feeling like they have a little bit more of an impact, it does seem to win out on that, yeah.
Okay. And did you have anything to add?
I mean, I think that allowing under-18s to vote will not really change anything. Like I said, it's just going to be a tool for, politicians to manipulate. What is most important for me is really the inputs we are really, investing in these processes. And even for those who are under 18 years old, or for those who are 18 who are not even participating, are there things these guys are doing in their community? Now, the government is looking for, like, when it comes to the international community, social media is doing so well. Is an instrument where people now have, you know, the opportunity to freely express their voice. So we need to start hearing the voice of young people on the media. What are they saying? What should the government be doing? Are they mounting pressure on the government on what they should do and what they should not be doing? Because if you are not seen, the government will not recognize you. The government will only recognize you if they think you're going to be of an advantage to them. So even for those who are listening to us, what are you doing in your community? What are you doing in your family? What are you doing amongst your friends? Are you leading a change? Are you advocating for things? Do you say wrong things, or do you keep quiet and say, well, it's not my business? You know, I know there's the Good Samaritan law, it's not applicable, but again, we have to start calling ourselves to order in your own capacity. You are running the government of your own life. You're running the government, you know, in your schools. What are you doing? Before you can call out someone to say, oh, you're not doing well. Are you doing well? What are you doing? Are you contributing to your community? So that's what I think young people should start doing.
Okay, thank you. Lola and Ellie, hello Lola and Ellie, at Alderley Edge School have asked, will a larger and younger electorate lead to larger diversity in the executive and the legislature? I think that's probably one for you. You mentioned this earlier.
Yeah.
Right?
That's a really interesting question. So as I mentioned, we have 16-year-olds voting in Wales and Scotland, also in Jersey and Guernsey. There's no particularly strong evidence that it has diversified their legislatures and executives yet. I think that would take a while to filter through. I mean, intuitively, the answer is yes. It took a very long time, for example, for votes for women to translate to senior female politicians. But I think it would happen eventually, yes.
Yeah, it's one of those things, isn't it, where there's such a lag that you just, so something to watch maybe in the next decades as to how if there is an impact in those regions. Yeah, interesting. And I think this one's mainly for you, Mary, maybe a bit more technical, but I'm intrigued. So this has come from Anwen at St Augustine's, who has asked, what laws are necessary or would be necessary to protect the integrity of under 18s as individuals when voting, considering their parents are legally responsible for many aspects of their lives?
Again, whilst I am of the opinion that under 18s should not be allowed to vote, if under 18s are allowed to vote, like he previously mentioned, I don't think their parents should force them or should mandate them on who to vote for or who not to vote for. Again, it takes away that freedom of choice, that will, and that presumption of adulthood. If your parents still need to tell you or dictate to you who you need to vote for, then you shouldn't be voting in the first place, because you don't understand, the essence of that duty and the corresponding rights that are attached to it. So I do not think that under 18 should vote. And even if they're allowed to vote, if you go to the voting poll, I don't think your parents should, go with you to say this is who you should be voting for. Again, that's manipulation. It means if a group of parents want candidate A and their children don't want candidate A, all of those parents, or 20 of them, automatically the votes will go. So it's now a family voting system rather than an individual voting system. Yes, the law recognizes your family, your last name, but the law recognizes you as an individual. When you commit a crime, the law looks at you, not your parents, not your siblings. So the same way when you want to vote, the law should look at you, not your parents, not your siblings. And that's why I'm still of the opinion that under 18 should not be allowed to vote, because I think you're still under the supervision of your parents.
Okay, thank you. Now, you mentioned, Matt, we mentioned, I brought up proportional representation, and then you mentioned first past the post. So I think it might be helpful. Can we have a quick summary of what those mean?
Sure.
Just for everyone in case, because I find it confusing.
Yeah, fair enough. So the United Kingdom is split into 650 little bits called constituencies, and each one of those constituencies represents a seat in the House of Commons.
Yep.
In order to win that seat, you just need to win more votes than everyone else running in that constituency. And so hence your first past the post is a horse racing metaphor.
Yep.
Right? So if you vote for the person that wins, then your vote is kind of counted. But everyone else who votes, their votes get completely wasted because you haven't contributed to the winning team, and therefore your vote just gets nullified, basically. And bit of maths, which I know is your favourite. In order to win 100% of government power, you need to have 50% of the seats in the House of Commons.
Yep.
And in order to win 50% of those seats, you need 50% of the vote in those constituencies, which means that mathematically you could get as little as 25% of the vote in order to get 100% of the government power. And that doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
Right, so that's kind of proportional representation would be more about...
You'd need many more votes in order to get more that level of government power, yeah.
Okay, interesting. And do you think, because this is a question that has come up a few times in the chat, is like, would changing to that feel like it would empower younger people more, do you think?
The evidence absolutely suggests as much. Countries that have introduced proportional representation or who have had it for a very long time have much higher voter turnout amongst younger voters, yeah.
Okay, so then, final question on this. I'm going down a rabbit hole. This is really interesting. So then, what are the cons of proportional representation?
It can be quite confusing. It can be quite difficult to know who has established the votes, where they've come from. You tend to get quite big coalitions of smaller parties, and some of those parties might be relatively extreme politically because it can be quite a bit easier for extremist parties to do well. But they are still tend to be at the fringes, so even in countries where this is common, they still don't tend to have that much power. But there are certainly cons, yeah.
Okay. Awesome. So the reason I was interested in mentioning voting systems, I'm not going to do the details of this, but I couldn't resist mentioning some maths. So there is, for those of you who are interested in the maths, there is an interesting theorem called Arrow's impossibility theorem, which actually looks at voting systems. And basically, you can prove mathematically that there is never a perfect voting system. So it's always, when people have these discussions about which voting system is best, it kind of depends on what your outcome, what's your criteria for best. So, and I think that kind of relates back to what you were saying about, Matt, about saying, from your perspective, you think under 18 should be able to vote because it just increases engagement. And that's like, that is your goal, that is your criteria. And therefore, based on your criteria, allowing them to vote, you know, is the sort of the choice that you would pick, I guess. Okay, right, I think we've got time for one more question. Let me just try and find one in here. So, Lola at Alderley Edge for Girls, Alderley Edge School for Girls. Students are typically in full-time education at 18, just like at 16. So how does my environment change so significantly in the space of 2 years that I then become eligible to vote? You would argue it doesn't.
Exactly. Made my point, Lola. Exactly. Agree.
I mean, the school system is not the only ecosystem where students are in, right? So that you're in school at 16 and that you're in school at 18 does not mean school is the only place where you have interactions. Right. There are places 18-year-olds can go to outside school. There are things they can do out of school, the school system, that 16-year-olds cannot. And the way life is built, like I said, it's an entire process. All of the decisions, who I am today, it's not based on what I did today. It's based on what I've been doing in the last 2 or almost 3 decades. Right. And so all of those engagement, the things you watch, the things you listen to, have the capacity to influence your decision on, you know, the choice. And remember that the choice to vote does not mean you're exercising the best choice of candidates. It's just a choice to exercise your free will. And so I think that you're 16 and someone is 18 and you're in the same school ecosystem is not just the only factor to guarantee the exposure of an 18-year-old compared to a 16-year-old.
Very good point. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so we are pretty much out of time, but I do want a final note from each panelist. And I have actually come to a decision myself on what I think about the big question. So I think we know what this is going to be, Matt, but nonetheless, should under 18s be allowed to vote? In one sentence.
Yes, they absolutely should, because we need more participation from more people. We'll get better political decisions as a consequence, and we'll get people more interested in politics, which is so important for their futures and their lives.
Mary?
I don't think under 18 should be allowed to vote, because we need to build people to get into the process of political interests. We need to change the political stage and the political playing field. Until then, under 18s should not be allowed to vote.
Okay, interesting. And my decision I have come to after this discussion is, this is genuine, I think that they should be allowed to vote.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of this discussion, seeing all of your brilliant comments and questions, it feels like everyone's just a bit like kind of done with politics, a bit fed up with it, a bit bored of it. And so from my perspective, it feels like doing something crazy, like 16-0, like it's going to shake it up. That's kind of where I've settled. But obviously feel free to come to your own conclusions and opinions. This is the whole point of these discussions. So thank you both, Matt and Mary. Thank you all of you for watching. It's been great fun as always. I've certainly had fun. I'm assuming the panel, and hopefully you've all had fun as well. Do head over to oxplore.org to have a look at the content related to this big question in particular, plus all of the other big questions. There are many, many, many other big questions for you to explore there, including other live stream events like this that you can watch on YouTube and other things. We will reveal the competition winners by the end of the week. And otherwise, just thank you again. Thank you for joining, and hopefully we'll see you again next time.